Hello and welcome to Lecture 3 of this session on Fundamentals of Freshwater Health. I'm Michael McClain, Professor of Ecohydrology at IHE Delft in the Netherlands. In this lecture, we'll turn our attention to the pressures and threats to freshwater ecosystems and the ecosystem services you've just learned about. In this Fundamentals lecture, we'll review a range of pressures and threats, each of which will be examined in greater detail in Session 2. We'll focus on four main categories of pressures on freshwater ecosystems. The first is alteration of the quantity of water caused by the regulation of river flows and over-abstraction of water. We'll look at water quality decline caused by common and widespread contaminants like excess nutrients, raw sewage, and erosion from degraded lands. We'll consider habitat loss and destruction caused by the fragmentation of rivers, over-extraction of resources, and modification of riverbanks. And we'll review how these multiple pressures have led to biodiversity decline, which is further exacerbated by the introduction of invasive species. This is not a complete list of pressures degrading the health of freshwater ecosystems, but it does include some of the most important and ubiquitous. As you learned in Lecture 1 of this Fundamentals session, organisms inhabiting freshwater ecosystems are adapted to, and even dependent upon, natural variations in water flows and levels. Both high and low flow events are ecologically significant, as are the timing, duration, and frequency of those events. But water allocation to other uses generally operates on very different schedules, dictated by electricity demands, crop demands, or the demands of domestic and industrial water users. Large dams and reservoirs are designed to eliminate or smooth out the natural variability of river flows, so that water is available at the time and in the quantities needed to meet other demands. This alteration of natural flow variability stresses freshwater ecosystems and negatively affects ecosystem health. The example shown here is from the Colorado River Basin of North America. Flaming Gorge Dam forms a reservoir holding 4.7 billion cubic meters of water, which is nearly an entire year's worth of flow in the Green River where the dam is located. The blue line on the graphic to the right shows the natural variability of Green River flows throughout the year, and the red line shows the regulated flow downstream of the dam. The altered flow results in unnaturally high river flows during the winter months and unnaturally low flows during the summer. Downstream ecosystems have suffered as a result, with significant declines in native fish species. Water managers and water users are increasingly turning to groundwater as a more seasonally stable source of water for domestic irrigation and other uses. Abstracting groundwater at a rate higher than it is replenished or recharged leads to a reduction of groundwater level. As the images on the slide show, groundwater may also be an important source of water for terrestrial and wetland vegetation, and groundwater is the source of base flows and levels in nearby rivers and lakes. Groundwater depletion may therefore lead to the death of groundwater-dependent vegetation and the reduction of water levels in nearby rivers and lakes. Having a sufficient quantity of water is of little use if the quality of that water is unsuitable for the intended use. Water quality varies naturally in freshwater ecosystems depending on the source of water, geology of the basin, climate, and proximity to the sea. The biota itself may influence water quality, sometimes producing conditions harmful to other species. But organisms inhabiting freshwater ecosystems are adapted to cope with these natural variations and to recover from episodes of naturally poor water quality. The situation is different when poor water quality comes as a result of human activities. Agrochemicals are applied to agricultural fields worldwide and inevitably wash into freshwater ecosystems, and industrial wastes containing heavy metals too often leak from industrial processes. Sewage, whether treated or untreated, is eventually discharged to freshwater ecosystems or the sea, and land degradation is accelerating erosion and increasing sediment inflows to freshwater ecosystems. These water quality pressures are constant and push contaminant levels beyond anything freshwater ecosystems will have experienced before. Let's have a quick look at each of these in turn. Many chemical compounds used in agriculture eventually contaminate freshwater ecosystems, including pesticides and fertilizers. Pesticide contamination causes toxicity that's harmful or even lethal to aquatic biota. It's widespread and impacts groundwater as well as surface water. Fertilizer contamination is more insidious, leading to increases in nutrient levels, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus, and accelerating primary productivity in freshwater ecosystems. At first glance, increased nutrients may seem to be a good thing for freshwater ecosystems, but in reality, it's very harmful. The figure on the slide illustrates how widespread and intense nutrient loading is. The darkness of the color coding indicates increased percentages of nitrogen transport at the mouths of different rivers. Note that nitrogen transport has increased by more than 100% in many major rivers, especially those in industrialized countries of the north. But nitrogen transport is elevated and increasing in rivers of the south as well, and the situation is likely more serious than the graphic suggests due to a lack of available data. Nutrient contamination leads to eutrophication and fundamental changes in the communities of primary producers in freshwater ecosystems. Algal blooms, such as those shown in these images, are a common and particularly harmful outcome, sometimes producing toxic compounds and large increases in biochemical oxygen demand. Low or even anoxic conditions are common following such blooms, which may kill large numbers of fish and other oxygen-breathing aquatic organisms. Another serious source of contaminants in freshwater ecosystems is wastewater. The image on the slide indicates the proportion of wastewater that is treated in different regions of the world. Proper treatment can significantly reduce the levels of pollutants in wastewater, but for many parts of the world, the majority of wastewaters remain untreated. Wastewater may come from many sources, including industrial processes and urban runoff, but the most widespread is sewage. Untreated sewage consists of large amounts of biodegradable organic matter and nutrients which may cause oxygen depletion. Pathogens are also transported in untreated sewage, along with pharmaceuticals and other personal care products. This is a serious pressure on rivers and lakes, but may also affect groundwater when sewage leaks from latrines or underground septic tanks. The final water quality pressure I'll mention in this overview is excess sediment loads due to erosion of degraded soils. This too is a global phenomenon that not only reduces the productivity of soils, but introduces unnaturally high levels of sediment into freshwater ecosystems. Sediments, like nutrients and organic matter, are essential to the health of freshwater ecosystems, but excess loads cause harm. Excess sediment increases turbidity, reducing light levels and primary productivity in freshwater ecosystems. Fine sediments are transported downstream most easily and therefore alter ecologically important geomorphic features. For example, gravel bars where some fish species lay their eggs may be covered or mixed with fine sediments and become unsuitable habitat for the incubation of eggs. Transported sediments may also have other contaminants associated with them, such as pesticides or even heavy metals. As you see in this image, the impacts extend the length of river systems and into estuaries and coastal areas. Alteration of water quantities, discharge of chemical contaminants, and increasing erosion of the landscape all indirectly impact habitat quality and availability in freshwater ecosystems. But many human interventions directly fragment and even destroy freshwater habitat. Millions of dams block rivers around the world, even on some of the world's largest rivers. This is a view of Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River in the USA. The dam not only alters the natural flow regime of the river, it also blocks the access of fish in the lower reaches of the Colorado River to habitats upstream, and it blocks the transport of natural sediment loads. A recent global assessment of river fragmentation found that only 37% of rivers longer than 1,000 kilometers remain free-flowing over their entire length. Thousands of new dams are planned or already under construction around the world, and many of these are in high biodiversity river systems in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Mining of aggregates, especially sand from freshwater systems, directly destroys habitats and causes a range of associated impacts, such as channel incision and changes to downstream sediment transport. As river channels in size, river banks begin to erode and the channel may become disconnected from adjacent floodplains. Sand mining is a growing pressure around the world that freshwater scientists are only now coming to understand. Overfishing is, of course, another form of resource extraction with direct impacts on the target and related species in freshwater ecosystems. Large species like this arapaima from the Amazon are most at risk. A recent global study found that freshwater megafauna populations declined by 88% from 1970 to 2012, with populations of megafishes declining by nearly 95%. These large species are more vulnerable to population declines due to their large body size, complex habitat requirements, long lifespan, and late maturity. Many rivers, especially those in urban and suburban areas, have been re-engineered to reduce flood hazards and fix channels in place. Such systems will also likely be contaminated from urban runoff and wastewaters and have altered flow and sediment regimes. Consequently, their integrity and health will be very poor. The movement of people around the world and continued internationalization of trade has led to the introduction, whether intentional or unintentional, of many species of plants and animals to freshwater ecosystems they would not inhabit naturally. These non-native species sometimes have advantages that enable them to outcompete native species. This can cause severe alterations in the community structure of freshwater ecosystems and food webs. Non-native species that spread rapidly and cause environmental harm are referred to as invasive species. This image is of the invasive Asian carp, which was introduced to North America from Asia for aquaculture, but it escaped or was released into freshwater ecosystems and is now spreading rapidly throughout the continent's freshwater ecosystems, especially the Mississippi River Basin. This map shows available information on the number of invasive species in different countries, including both terrestrial and aquatic species. It's clear that the pressure of invasive species is felt most strongly in the economically developed global north and newly industrializing countries. All combined, these pressures are undermining the health of freshwater ecosystems and causing alarming declines in the populations of freshwater species. This graph shows the decline in populations of freshwater species over the past 50 years, utilizing data from more than 3,700 monitored populations and representing 944 species of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fishes. These populations have declined by an average of 84%. Most of the declines are seen in freshwater amphibians, reptiles, and fishes, and they're recorded across all regions of the world. As a consequence, almost 1 in 3 freshwater species are threatened with extinction. This figure from the 2018 Global Wetland Outlook presents the global threat status of wetland-dependent organisms in different regions of the world. Note the high level of threat across all categories of organisms in all geographic regions. Note as well that freshwater fish and amphibians are among the most threatened. So, to summarize what we've covered in this lecture, freshwater ecosystems worldwide are subject to pressures that threaten their health and lead to declines in the population size and biodiversity of organisms. The main categories of pressures include alteration of water flows and levels by engineering infrastructure or over-abstraction of water, contamination of water from agricultural runoff, wastewater discharges, and erosion of degraded soils, freshwater ecosystem fragmentation and habitat destruction from dams, resource overexploitation, and riverbank modification, and the spread of invasive species. Now that we have a better understanding of freshwater ecosystems, their ecosystem services, and the pressures they're under, it's time to look more closely at how we monitor their health and what management actions can be taken to protect and restore freshwater ecosystem health. Please proceed to the exercises associated with this topic to deepen your knowledge and understanding further. That concludes this lecture.